Now, believe it or not, the camera that I use on this channel is a camera that came out in April of 2014. It's this right here, the Panasonic Gh4. Now, I still think this camera is very usable despite the fact that it's 6 years old. It has all the most important functions. It shoots in 4K, has good slow-mo, it's fully manual, everything you need a camera to do. I would go so far as to say it's probably one of the best cameras you can buy for under $600. And that is the main reason that I own this. I wanted something fairly powerful, yet inexpensive, and that is where this camera shines. One of the main things you should keep in mind when considering this camera, however, is that it doesn't have autofocus. Or technically it does, but it doesn't work in my opinion. Another thing to keep in mind is that it has a micro four thirds sensor, which means it's not that great in low light. For me, it hasn't been a huge issue though. I don't shoot in low light a whole lot. When I do, I just accept the fact that there's going to be a little grain. So this camera doesn't have any fancy bells or whistles, but what it does do, it does with excellence. I have spent countless hours shooting with this camera, and from my experience, it's incredibly reliable and durable. One of the great pros to this camera is the great menu system. Personally, I do a lot of live event stuff, and changing settings on this camera is super fast and easy. As far as picture quality goes, if you nail your white balance and exposure, you can get some great results out of this camera. So as far as physical features go, this camera has a mic jack, headphone jack, a micro HDMI port. On this side we have your SD card slot, battery compartment, and we have a lot of dials, 3 to be exact, and a ton of customizable function buttons. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and show you what camera settings I use. So for photo style, I shoot in Cine like D, with my contrast set to -2, my sharpness set to -3, noise reduction -1, saturation -3, and hue at neutral. Now there's not really a scientific method for this. I've just based it off what other people have done and what seems to look good. Now I always am shooting either in 4K at 24 frames per second or in 1080p at 60 frames a second. The nice thing about this camera is you can shoot 1080p 60 at 200 megabytes per second, which is important because for slow motion you want a pretty good data rate. And I have my exposure mode in manual. Highlight shadow, this is important. Again, it's not an exact science. I shoot with my shadow at +2 and my highlight at -3. This just gives me a slightly better dynamic range. When you get your Panasonic Gh4, I recommend routing your common functions to your function buttons. For example, I have my recording modes set to function 1 here right in the top, so I can quickly change between Full HD 60 and 4K 24. And my white balance and ISO are pre-installed on these two buttons, so that's quick access to those. All my essentials are right at the ready. And then obviously I have my shutter speed on this back dial and my aperture on this top dial. I'd like to show you some footage I've shot with this, so you can get a good idea of what kind of quality this can produce. So if you're looking to buy a budget camera and you can handle a couple of the cons like the lack of autofocus, I think this is a great option even 6 years later.